Hi, this is Rosemary, and I think it's about time for another felting video. I've had a lot of people request that I do a tutorial on how to make hats. It's a little different than making bags. There's some similarities, but with the layout, there's some tricks to making sure your hat comes out just right. So the first things that you need are a washboard you may need, and this is a nice wooden washboard. I found this at an antique store. You can also use tin ones. I don't like to use the glass ones. They break too easily, and you're really pressing on those, so I use wood or tin. Put your pattern, get out of your dog food bag, and your biodegradable soap, and water. So the first thing that you want to do is take your hat pattern and lay it out for just a moment to eyeball it on your tray so that you can see kind of where it goes. Then you're going to start laying it out, and of course, as you remember, I use what's called the crisscross pattern to lay it out. I'm using some of Prissy's wool, and I'm using some of Pepe and Pearl's wool. So I've already picked this for debris, so rather than carding this time I picked it, but I'm still going to stretch out those fibers and make sure that I've got a nice stress fiber, and look at that wonderful long staple. So I'm going to lay them out crossways first, all over here, and I kind of want a swirly whirly hat, so I'm just mixing up these black and white fibers. So I'm going to set out my fibers so that they are a nice thin layer of wool, and I overlap them. Now this is just one direction, but I try to make every layer as comprehensive as possible and as covering as possible. And remember, we want those wispy ends that are going to go out beyond what we call our resist. And of course, this is our resist, so we want those ends to go out beyond, and I like them to go way out beyond. I like to try to create not just one side, but part of the what I lay out to wrap around the top side, because then the second layer of layout is not as thick, and it's much easier to make those transitions that go around the corner if you move your wool way out past the resist and then fold it around. So keep watching, and I'll keep laying out, and you'll see. So for now, I'm going to lay it out in this direction. Hi, so I've got this layer laid out. Now if you remember, if you've watched any of my other tutorials, you'll notice that it's nice and comprehensive. I'm going to feel, and I'm going to look with my eyes, and I'm going to listen for the thickness of the wool. So as I press, I'm feeling to make sure that this wool is all pretty evenly laid out here. Now it's obviously too thin, but you can't hardly see any of this tray underneath. I'm also going to take my resist, and I'm going to look at my resist. See how this comes way out from around the resist. Now this is going to be a short brimmed hat. It's not going to be a long brimmed hat. But one of the things I want to do here, and this is a little trick for going around the corner, this goes around the edge of the hat, but we want this to go out a little farther than anything else. So I'm going to lift up my resist, and I'm going to lay this right out as far as I can. And you'll see later on, if you keep watching, the reason for this. And this is a little trick I've learned by making lots and lots and lots of hats that nobody will teach you. The other thing that we want to remember is that we're making a hat that's circular. So if we make our hat, I cut my patterns for my hats straight across, but that is not how you want the bottom of the hat to go. And people always ask me, well, then why don't you cut it the way you want it to go? Because I have taught hundreds of students, and none of the students ever make the brim of the hat, which is this bottom part of the hat. None of them ever make the right shape unless they consciously do it, and I tell them how to do it. This part is going to be sticking out. But what we want to remember about the brim of the hat is that we want it to smile just a little bit. That way, you get a circular opening to your hat. Remember, we're not going to cut this, we're going to shape this. So we have to constantly be aware of the shape of what we lay out here. So I've got this wool way out beyond my resist. I've got it pretty comprehensive. I'm looking for any thin spots. I might, oh, can you hear that high spot? So I'm going to put just a little bit right there. Sometimes we miss that. We don't want to do that. A little bit of wool shearing. Okay, so we're going to put that right there. Now remember, we are laying out the bottom half of our hat, the bottom of the hat. So this will be the outside of the hat. There will be all of these swirlies. What I lay out after this will not show. It will become the inside of the hat. So the next direction that I want to go is is in the up and down direction instead of the side to side direction. And so I'm going to start laying this out. Usually I lay out about thin layers. I work to lay it out as thinly as possible. Some hats that you see are very thick and they're very uncomfortable to wear. So I like my hats to be really comfortable to wear. So I make them as thin as I possibly can while still having the body to have their brim stiff after I finish them. So I'm going to take a little bit and start laying this out in the opposite direction. Now that I am sure, oh, I just felt the thin spot. Now that I am sure that I have this bottom part all comprehensive and fully covering what it needs to cover, I'm going to lay in the opposite direction. Okay, I am ready to wet down this wool. I'm going to show you a few things about this wool before I do. One is, I told you I wanted it thin. Can you see how fluffy that is? A lot of people think, oh, that's too thick. There is a huge amount of airspace between the fibers in this wool. The other thing that you want to notice is that along this brim, I've got these fibers sticking out this way. And there's a reason for that. Notice that there's a slight smile to the side-to-side fibers, the back end, the horizontal fibers, that's the word I'm looking for, to the horizontal fibers. Also notice that when I've laid out these fibers, this fiber overlaps this. Everything is very wispy. There's nothing that's clumped up. If I see anything clumped up like this, I'm going to pull it apart. Because the more we have those fibers opened up, the more those fibers are going to be able to link with each other. If we have them blunt next to each other, we're just going to have blunt ends coming up against each other. And we don't want that. We want to make sure that our fibers are interweave each other so that they make a great lock. Now, one of the things I notice is that when I make these as thin as I do, some people will say, oh, I see light through the hat. I like that, once again, because it makes it thinner and easier to wear, but because of how we lay it out with that crisscross fiber, these are never going to come apart. The hat I'm wearing on a daily basis, I've had for 7 years, and I can see light through it in places, but I'll wear it all the time because it's so lightweight. So let's wet this down. We want to take our resist and check that out and make sure all of our fibers come out beyond our resist. And we've got a little bit coming down here. The first thing we're going to do is wet down the brim, and this is critical. So as we wet down the brim, once again, we're going to use our hand to diffuse that water. We do not want to have these fibers move. They may look haphazard, but they are not. They are set down with a purpose, and so that we want to keep them exactly where they are and exactly where I've put them. And then, of course, I've got our biodegradable soap. We're going to put right along the brim here. Now, with this brim, I build my brim out beyond where the hat resist goes. And there's a reason for that, as I'm going to show you in just a minute. Now, these fibers that are sticking out, I roll them up to create a nice blunt edge. So I'm just really quickly rolling them up. And I'm going to check my edge right away to make sure that I have an edge that's going to be blunt. And right here we can see we've got some thin stuff. So we want to push up that smile. None of this little fuzzy stuff sticking out is okay. It has to be absolutely blunt along the edge, because we don't cut our hats open. We make a blunt edge. It makes a wonderfully stiff brim that will stand up, and it means that we have a stronger brim and the fibers are stronger. So I've got this nice and curved. Now right here, I think this is a little thin. I don't like the way it looks. There are some reasons why I don't. It's a little thin, but see how I can see those fibers moving that way? Fibers moving that way are more likely to split or not to be able to be shaped the way I want them to. Remember, we want fibers going this way, and we want fibers wrapped around that way, because then we have the strength and we have the flexibility to make the shape that we want. And especially with a hat brim, you want to make sure that you have the body and the shape around the edge of that brim so you have a nice blunt brim. So I'm pushing with my fingers right along the edge, just the way we did for our bag. Now notice right here and here, this comes way out to the side. I'm going to form this brim far beyond the edges of my resist, so that when I wrap it around the resist, I have edges that are already formed, so I don't have to worry about forming an edge around a corner, because that becomes bulky and then you can see where the seams are. So I've got that done. Now I'm going to put this beautiful blue soap, it looks like sapphires to me, on my wool, and once again I'm going to wet this down. Now I'm not going to wet the edges of my wool. I'm only going to wet the center where my resist goes. So I'm going to wet this down, gentle rolling motion as I wet it down. We want to make sure as we do this that we're making it nice and smooth, that when they come together we don't have any folds, that everything just flows from one piece of wool to the next. So we don't want any folds in our wool at all as we're laying it out. Now, this obviously isn't the size of our resist, but I usually use the resist to help press that wool down. It works really well. It makes it so that my wool doesn't stick to my fingers as much. So I've got this, I've got my edge nice. Notice that my resist comes out like this, but my edge right here is wet beyond with these other dry fibers. Once again, that's going to help you form your brim a lot more smoothly. Right here, if you'll notice right here, can you see how you can see the air between the fibers? This is something you don't want. Over on this side, you can see there's no air between the fibers. So I'm going to work so that there's no air between these fibers, and I'm going to add a little bit more wool right here to wrap it and to thicken it up. I can tell it's thin there, so I want to make sure that I keep those edges all the same width, and I just tuck that right under there and try to make sure that you're not folding it, but just pushing it under. Now I've got a nice blunt edge right there as well. Put a little soap there because it makes it so your hands don't stick. So now my next step is to take that resist and lay that resist down. Notice the smile, notice the nice blunt edge that I can push up on. No little funny fibers sticking out. And I'm going to lay this resist right down on my hat, just like that. And I use the resist to kind of wet down those fibers that go out there. Now notice I'm going to pull this over here, and as you can see right here, we have a beautiful transition around this corner. We don't have to worry about making it bulky because we've already created the corner. There you go. Now I'm going to lay out the second side of this hat. And as you can see, I don't have as much to lay out because of how much I laid out on the first side. It makes it so that I have a much better transition here. I only lay out between here and here. So it's much easier. I don't have to do it as, I don't have to work as much wool going around those corners and making thick edges and thick seams. So that's a little trick I've learned from making hats over and over again. So our next step is to just take this fiber and do exactly what we did before, and that is lay out. Now this time, this is the inside. Remember, the first layer you laid out before was the outside. This is going to be the inside of your hat. Now, although there's a few wispies that stick out on the edges of that, I don't have to go too far out, and it's not going to take as much wool to do this second side as it did the first side. Also, one of the things to notice is that I've got Pepe's and Pearl's wool. Now, Pearl is Pepe's daughter. This Prissy was the daughter of a different ram, and her wool is more coarse. Now, there are the two different types of wool perform differently. I like mixing the wool because the soft ones from Pearl and the soft ones from Pepe make a nice soft hat, comfortable hat. But wonderfully, the fibers from Prissy that are stiff make a fabulous brim because that stiffness works into the brim and makes a nice stiff brim. In the olden days, they used to use things like mercury, and some people will tell you starch the brim and do all of that. And I used to do that 15 years ago, and it was a hopeless failure. What you will learn as you are doing this, that it comes with the layout and with how you finish the hat off. We will not use any starch, no chemicals, nothing else to make your brim stiff except for rubbing and forming and shaping this hat. And you can shape a hat any way you want as long as you can envision it in a two-dimensional form. So you're taking a two-dimensional form and you're going to make it three-dimensional. So give me a little bit and I'll get this all laid out the same way I laid out the bottom part. So I'm ready to finish wetting down this hat. You can see once again I've got some really thick It looks really thick, but it's not. These are 3 comprehensive layers that I put down, and they're very, very thin. And I can actually feel the resist underneath as I touch down, but I can feel the layers of wool between myself and the resist, and that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm feeling for. Also notice that I've got the edge of my hat right here, where before we laid it way out here, we don't have to do that with the second layer. We've got quite a bit of wool right here already. So as we wet it down, I'm going to wet down this time the top part first. And once again, I'm going to use my hand to diffuse that, because we don't want to move our fibers too much, because we've got those fibers laid out in a certain way. Same crisscross pattern that you laid out the bottom fibers in. And I'm going to put a little bit of this soap on. And sometimes I put a little on my hands because I don't want them to stick. Now as I press, I want to make sure that I'm not lifting up those fibers. And if I need a little bit more water on them, I'm going to do that. Make sure it's just good and wet. The water can't hurt it now. Now some people tell you not to put too much soap and, you know, all sorts of things like that on your fibers. At this point in time, this is not going to hurt your felting. Later on, we'll rinse some of that soap out because it'll make your fibers float and it'll make your fibers separate. But right now, we want lots of soap. Mostly, we don't want your hands to stick to those fibers. And we want those fibers to really start working together. Hang on just a second. I'm going to go get more water. We keep putting soap on, and the last thing that we're going to do is finish off this brim exactly the same way you finished off the brim on the underside, with one exception, and that is that you don't have to quite go so far around. So here's where let me pour off some of this dirty water. It goes right through my patio. We're good. Okay, so right here, you can see where we built that around. So now I just wrap that right around so that it blends right with what we've already done. And then I'm going to wrap that second brim around like this. And I'm not folding, I'm not making the fibers roll like this. I'm making sure that I slip them underneath so that they're flat on the underside. We don't want to roll those fibers. We don't want to have blunt against blunt. It's always wispy, wispy. Once again, here's that other edge where I've built up that edge, and I just have to wrap that around right now. So I'm going to, don't want to make those fibers move, and I'm going to wet down this brim right now and see if I can get that shape the same way I shaped that other side, just like this. First thing is to wet it down, and then use those fingers to push those fibers in place. Just like that, and just tuck them under, just work them under so that they're nice and smooth. Takes a little practice doing this. I'm going to pour off some of that extra water. Makes my fibers float so I can't shape them. It always helps to do this either with a bucket next to you if you're doing it inside in the wintertime, or on a patio or outside where you can pour that water off. But we should have just about enough water in this hat right now. So as you can see, we've just about got this hat wet down. We don't want it lifting up the way it is here or here. So I'm using a gentle rolling motion with my hands, and I'm going to put some soap on my hands to make it so that my hands don't stick. And I'm going to check for things like little flaps and little folds that I see here. I want this to be absolutely smooth. So you can see I'm using my fingers to smooth out this wool and to shape this wool. Once again, I'm looking for air pockets in the wool, and I'm pushing down. Okay, right here feels nice and blunt. Nice and blunt right here. Feels nice and blunt, and I'm actually shaping. So as you're pressing on your wool, we just about have this wet down now. As you're pressing on your wool, one of the things you do the whole time that you're working this hat is you are aware of the hat shape. You're actually sculpting the hat shape. Right here, I feel like this is a little bit thin, so while I've got the time, I'm going to wrap that right there. And I call that wrapping the edge. I've actually wrapped the edge as I laid it out, and I'm spreading this out, and I'm making sure that everything is shaped exactly as I want it to be shaped. And there are no folds. As you see, I don't have any blunt folds or anything. Everything is nice and smooth here. Oh, there's one that I have to pull apart. So I'm looking for places on this side where maybe I might have some blunt edges that come up like this and that make folds. So we're doing this. Also notice, can you see my resist? See the smile on my hat and see how my resist comes down. Now, of course, we don't want the two edges of our hat to meet because then they'll felt together. But we don't have to worry if this side is a little longer than that side or that side's a little longer than this side, because we can always change that center up here on the top while we're shaping it. So we just want to have that general shape, and now we're just about ready to go into the phase where we're just going to press and press and press and press and press, just like I'm doing. And I love the feel of the soapy water. But there is one more thing I do before I finish shaping my hat. Now this depends on the kind of wool you use. Because my wool felt so fast, I want to make sure that I do not have any flaps or folds on the other side of my wool. Now I shouldn't because of the way I laid it out. Remember, we didn't tuck anything very much under here on this side. We did tuck a little bit under here, but that will be fine. And so I'm going to do one thing though. I do this with my students because sometimes my students have to tuck their fibers in underneath here, and this is something that gets a little messy, but it's something I can do with my wool. And they tell people not to do this, but if you have good felting wool, my wool is already felting just in the layout process. I flip it right over. Okay, and you can see the bottom side here, and I can check this here. I can check to make sure I have some good blunt edges here. As you see, I don't have any flaps on this side, no blunt edges on this side. I'm going to check this underside, see how the bottom side is longer than the top side. That is not a problem because I'm checking for any little anomalies that you might find in the wool. Right now is the time to catch those and fix them so that you don't have to fix them later on. And I am just about ready to just start pressing on this wool. More soap. Never can have too much soap, can you? Okay, just always feel good. Well, you can't have too much soap, but not really. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I've got some nice blunt edges here, and I've got some nice blunt edges on the underside here of my hat that I really, really like. And I am just going to start pressing on this hat and shaping this hat now. Now what I'm going to do, and you will see me complete it later. Right now, I'm going to press, press, press.